Kia ora koutou, Marky here with quite an important video, really, quite a big topic that I want to talk about that very few people are talking about, if anyone. So we'll get into that in a second. So just to welcome you to the channel if you are new, so you probably pick up pretty quickly that there's no production, there's no graphics, there's no kind of style to this channel. It's all content. We shoot things on the hoof. We're kind of rough and ready, and we're homely. We like to think that this channel is like kind of having a friendly chat. So if you prefer YouTube channels that are a little bit more slick, with high production value, and maybe with captions and things like that, this probably isn't going to be your cup of tea. So we'll part as friends, unless you got a real burning interest in this subject, and you might stick with the presentation. And for those of you who are familiar with the channel, subscribers and patrons, thank you very much. It's great to have you back. So yes, identity disorders. Okay, so not many people will talk about identity disorders. It's a kind of term that I've kind of possibly invented. I hope so. That would be nice. Somebody may have beaten me to it. And this is, like I say, a very controversial topic. So my background is working, among many other things, working in the gender field as a psychotherapist. So working with people who are undergoing a gender transition. Now, to those of you who are not in the field or are not familiar with the world of the world of gender diversity, you'd be more familiar with the term sex change, which is a completely inappropriate term because people with gender identity disorder, basically their head and their identity, how they feel, is at odds with their physical body. So we call that a gender transition. Which may be physical, or may involve physical elements like surgery, or may not, but it involves moving from one gender role to the other, in a public way, or maybe in a particular way, for example, with family or at work. So that was my role. I worked in a gender clinic for a long time. So people with what was termed gender identity disorder. Now, even that is controversial because the whole field of gender is highly polemic and polarized and highly politicized. So there are people that would, very angrily declaim that it's a disorder, and they would say that it's just a difference. I think we were working for a state health service for the NHS, so in order to provide kind of treatment for people, it has to be a disorder. So sometimes a diagnosis can be useful because it opens a doorway to treatment for people when they need treatment. But many people with gender diversity or a different gender identity to the physical sex that they were born with don't require treatment or any medical intervention, and they're more likely to kind of argue that it's not a disorder. Okay, so what we're finding is that more and more people are identifying as transgender, either binary, which means that they were born and identified as a male at birth, but they identify as female, or the other way around, and then non-binary, which is where people don't feel they fit in with either male or female. Now, this is nothing new, because there are cultures where people have had this identity for, probably millennia, who knows. So this is all kind of real stuff. And so first of all, I want to make it very clear that I am not undermining anybody who has a transgender identity. Okay, be it binary or non-binary. But one of the interesting phenomena that's occurring is the number of people presenting with these identities is going through the roof. Okay, and if it carries on at current rates, everybody will be kind of seeking gender transition. Okay, so on a graph up until about 2011, it kind of looked like that. It was a steady curve, and then from about 2011, it's kind of gone like that. Okay, so something is going on. Okay, so this may be that people have always had these identities, but the internet, the advent of the internet and communication means that people are more educated and they're able to identify their different identity, or it could be a whole range of other things. Okay, so I'm going to draw a line under that for a second. I'm going to park that for a second, and then I'm going to talk about something completely different, which has also inspired this video, and that is Satanism. Now, okay, now I'm not going to get too deeply into Satanism because it's a big subject in itself, but I recently did a video on a particular strand of Satanism. It's called LaVeyan or non-deistic Satanism. Okay, and I watched a video on this, which kind of a little light bulb came on in my head when I watched it. Now, Satanism isn't devil, in this school of Satanism, is not devil worship. It's a kind of post-Nietzsche philosophy and ideology. Okay, I've done another video on it, or a book review on the topic, so you can check that one out. Now, one of the things that sometimes that is said in the satanic literature from this particular school, it's known as the Church of Satan, is that you don't become a Satanist, you are born a Satanist. So what happens is people come upon the writings of this guy, Anton LaVey, who is the founder, and it strikes a strong chord with them, and they think, that's me, and they identify with it, and they think that's how I've always been. Now, one of the things that I touched on also in that video, and I talk about in a lot of other videos, is something called neurodiversity, and particularly the autistic spectrum. Okay. Now, I am on the autistic spectrum mildly, so I can, I'm allowed, I'm allowed to talk about this, and sometimes I talk about it in a critical way sometimes. So check out my videos on neurodiversity and stuff like this for my views around this. So personally, I don't think that autism is a disability, or certainly not mild high-functioning autism. I very much see it as a difference. Okay, but one of the things that's interesting is that nearly every kind of strong subculture or hobby group or fringe group, so for example, paganism, neo-paganism, which is essentially is kind of you could say it's a very old religion, but it's a kind of a new religion or a new spiritual movement. People that kind of follow things avidly, okay, that's probably a better catch-all. So there can be kind of fans, fans of followers of music or literature or anything. There is a very high incidence of people who are on the autistic spectrum within those groups. Okay, and I think Satanism is certainly a subculture, and I think, and this is going to be controversial, some people won't like this, is that to some degree the rising trend in people who identify as transgender or gender diverse, part of that is a social thing. Okay, so I think there have always been, and there still are, people who are genuinely transgender, and I also think there are a lot of people that think they are transgender. Okay, some people are going to really hate this. Okay, and you can disagree with me. Just disagree with me politely, because if you're just rude, I'll delete you. And I like to hear different views on this. So this is where kind of identity kind of comes in, and one thing that few people are aware of is that there is something called transracialism. Okay, so where somebody might be white and they identify as black. Now you might think that's a real kind of rare, odd, thing. You're making it up, Marky. Pause now and Google transracialism and just have a read of what comes up. Okay. And I have colleagues who, on not an irregular, not an uncommon basis, get clients contact them asking for help because they identify as cats. Okay, and I'm not being facetious or joking or anything like that. That's what they do, and there's a whole subculture of people who are otherkin, who identify either as otherkin. Generally speaking, it's quite, can be kind of mythical creatures and that kind of thing. So there is something going on with identity, okay, and that's why I think what we're looking at in society isn't just an increase in transgender identity, it's an increase in confusion around identity, or incongruence around identity, because people would probably say that they're not confused, that they strongly feel they are a cat. It's not that they feel that they might be. And you have to kind of respect, what it might seem weird or wacky, but I think, we have to kind of, I think it's, if somebody feels a certain way, they feel a certain way. It's not for anyone else to tell them that they don't. Okay, I think that needs a degree of respect, even if on the surface it might seem kind of something that's kind of absurd. So what I think is going on is a crisis in identity. and gender identity is just a part of it. You know, so some people might identify as a Satanist. Some people might identify as a cat or a dog, or as a dragon, or as somebody from a different race. And what my tentative theory is, you know, and this isn't evidence, there is some evidence based in some areas of this. So we know there's a huge crossover, or a huge correlation between people who are on the autistic spectrum and people who identify as transgender. We know that. The figures tend to suggest that it's about probably a quarter of people, but I think from clinical experience it's much higher than that. Is that I think people who are on the autistic spectrum often have a different sense of self, maybe not such a strong sense of self. Who knows, really? I don't know how you would describe this, really. I don't want to put this in any kind of pejorative way, but they have a maybe more fluid sense of self, or incongruous is probably the best word. Often have an incongruous sense of self, or a less rigid sense of self. Okay. The other thing, you know, that we know about people who are neurodiverse, particularly people on the autistic spectrum, is that they feel different. I feel, you know, I've got this myself. I feel very different. I feel like I don't belong. I often feel like an alien, and that's how people feel. Now, Doreen Virtue, before she had a kind of Christian conversion, she look up Doreen Virtue, and interesting Freudian slip. And she wrote this book. What was it called? Was it called Star People? So she was it included a kind of personality test, and in it would say that, you know, you're actually a reincarnation of fairy kind, or a reincarnation of an alien, or a reincarnation of different kinds of non-human beings that have kind of come into the world. And I filled in this questionnaire, and I identified, the results came out that I was everything. So what I think she was tuning into is the fact that there are loads of people, particularly people on the autistic spectrum, whose identity is different and interesting, and not, you know, concretely wedded to the tangible things. So somebody might be, you know, might be white but identify as black. Somebody might identify as a different species. Somebody might identify as, you know, your identity can be very different to what the physical, tangible, measurable, historic reality is. So I think, you know, and I think this will be very controversial, but I think this needs to be said, you know, and I'd be grateful if you'd share this video and spread, because I think this needs to be addressed. Is that I think there should be in the DSM and the diagnostic manuals that people use, is something called identity disorder, a kind of overarching identity disorder. Now, this doesn't negate people who are genuinely transgender, because I think there are still lots of people who are genuinely transgender, but I think a lot of people, particularly young people who are on the autistic spectrum, who have difficulty and all the things that I've described around their sense of self. Okay, and before we encourage people to make life choices that they may not be able to reverse, I think we should be researching this field in more depth and offering help for people around identity. Not to change them, not to do conversion therapy and convince somebody that the way they identify is not real, because that's not helpful. But to understand a little bit more about what's going on, and to help people find a sense of comfort in their identity, because that's all that matters. Okay, it doesn't matter if somebody thinks they're a cat, as long as they're happy. You know, who's to tell them otherwise? Okay, it's about helping people to achieve a sense of comfort, and clearly a lot of people on the autistic spectrum feel that they don't belong, feel like they're different, feel like maybe, you know, the other people don't understand them, or you know, they feel alienated, ostracized, all those things. So I think maybe this is the direction to go in. And I'm not saying this is to replace all the services that are currently provided for people with gender identity issues, but this is something to run alongside that, and to help people find who they truly feel they are and achieve a sense of comfort with that. That's what we as therapists need to be doing. We don't need to be telling people what they are, certainly not. We need to be finding out how people identify, and also, you know, ultimately we need to find out why people identify in these different ways, and what actually is going on. And it may be, you know, who knows really. I'm not even going to speculate on that really. It's not obvious, and at the moment I don't think anyone knows. So I hope you found this interesting. Like I say, I'm gonna get some haters on this video, because it's like a kind of topic that people can't actually speak about these days, is the gender identity, because it's become so politicized. But you know, which I think is sad and unnecessary. I think we need to be kind to each other as human beings. We need to talk to each other. We need to talk to people that have different views. Everything's getting so extreme and so polarized. Let's start talking to each other again. So let me know what you think about this. Let me know, you know, maybe you've had similar ideas. Maybe you've developed these kind of thoughts further. And please, by all means, disagree with me. Just do it politely, and I will, you know, I will delete anyone that's kind of rude. You can say anything you like, just be polite, okay? Because I'm respectful and polite to everyone, whether I disagree with them or not, okay? And unless they're rude to me, and then, you know, the gloves are off. So yeah, please share this as much as you can, because this is something that people don't want to talk about, but it needs to be talked about. Should there be a diagnosis for identity disorder, or maybe it should be just something that's recognized perhaps not as a disorder but as a difference? Lots of things to think about. Thank you for listening. Rangi Marina.